What drives someone to walk into a place of worship, sit among the congregation for nearly an hour, and then open fire with the sole intention of slaughtering innocent people? On June 17th, 2015, 21-year-old Dylann Roof entered the historic Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. For 45 minutes, he sat through a Bible study session, listening, nodding along, and even reading verses aloud. Then, as the group bowed their heads in prayer, he pulled out a Glock 45 caliber handgun and opened fire. When the massacre ended, 9 black parishioners lay dead, and an entire nation was left grappling with the horror of what had just happened. The massacre was one of the deadliest racially motivated attacks in modern U.S. history. But it wasn't a random act of violence. It was a meticulously planned execution, fueled by a deep-seated hatred Roof had nurtured for years. He later admitted that he had hoped his actions would spark a race war, a concept he had obsessed over for months. But what led him down this path? And how did law enforcement ultimately track him down and bring him to justice? Stick around as we uncover the chilling mind of a killer. Roof's radicalization didn't happen overnight. In the years leading up to the attack, he became obsessed with white supremacist ideology, frequently visiting extremist websites and consuming hate-fueled propaganda that blamed minorities for America's problems. His descent into hatred began subtly. His online search history showed an increasing fascination with racial violence, segregation, and neo-Nazi movements. He was particularly fixated on the 2012 killing of Trayvon Martin, believing the media had unfairly portrayed white people as aggressors. His worldview was shaped by false narratives spread through extremist forums, where he was fed the idea that white Americans were under attack. He had no prior criminal record, no history of violence, and no formal ties to organized hate groups. Yet through self-radicalization and exposure to extremists, he transformed into a domestic terrorist. In his manifesto, discovered after his arrest, he outlined his twisted reasoning for the attack. He claimed black people were inferior and that violence was necessary to defend his race. He idolized past white supremacists and believed that by committing mass murder, he would be remembered as a martyr. In reality, he was an isolated young man whose worldview had been shaped almost entirely by online extremism. The chilling part is that he never showed outward signs of his growing hatred. He wasn't vocal, didn't participate in protests, and lived a relatively unnoticed life before the attack. It's disturbing to think about how someone can go from an unknown figure to a mass murderer without anyone seeing the warning signs. But why Emanuel AME Church? Roof's attack wasn't just about murdering innocent people. It was a targeted strike on a symbol of black resilience. Founded in 1817, Emanuel AME is one of the oldest black churches in the South and has long been a beacon of hope, faith, and civil rights activism. The church was burned down in the 1820s after white supremacists accused its members of planning a slave revolt, and it remained a historical target for racist violence. During the Civil Rights Movement, it was a meeting place for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many black leaders fighting for racial equality. Roof specifically chose this location because of its historical significance. He believed attacking such a revered institution would make the greatest impact, striking at the heart of the black community. On the night of the shooting, Roof calmly walked into the church, carrying a concealed handgun and 8 magazines of ammunition. Despite being a complete stranger, he was welcomed without hesitation. The small Bible study group, consisting of men and women ranging from their 20s to their 80s, offered him a seat. For nearly an hour, he sat among them, listening to the scriptures, bowing his head in prayer, and pretending to participate. But none of it mattered. When the time came, he stood up, pulled out his weapon, and started firing. Survivors later recalled the horror of the moment, how Roof laughed as he gunned down elderly worshipers, how he reloaded multiple times, and how he deliberately spared one woman, telling her, "I need you to tell the story." The victims included Reverend Clementa Pinckney, a respected state senator and pastor, Tywanza Sanders, who died trying to shield his mother, Susie Jackson, an 87-year-old woman who was the oldest victim, and several others who had spent their lives serving their community. The gunfire lasted for minutes, but for those inside, it felt like an eternity. If you're finding this story as unsettling as it sounds, take a second to like the video. It really helps the channel out. After the attack, Roof fled in his car, driving toward North Carolina. But despite killing 9 people in cold blood, he didn't behave like someone on the run. For 14 hours, he remained at large. His behavior after the massacre shocked investigators. He made no attempt to hide his location or change his appearance. He even stopped for food at a fast food restaurant. When police finally caught up to him in Shelby, North Carolina, nearly 250 miles away, he was casually driving down the highway, unfazed. When officers pulled him over, Roof surrendered without resistance. Inside his car, they found the murder weapon, a Confederate flag, and a journal filled with hate-fueled rants. Despite overwhelming evidence, Roof refused to plead guilty. Instead, he insisted on representing himself in court against all legal advice because he didn't want anyone suggesting he was mentally ill. He showed no remorse, no regret, and no emotion. When the judge asked him if he had anything to say during sentencing, he simply responded, "I felt like I had to do it." The prosecution presented undeniable proof of his guilt, including security footage, survivor testimonies, and Roof's own confession. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before reaching a unanimous decision. On January 10th, 2017, Roof was sentenced to death, making him the first person in U.S. history to receive a federal death sentence for a hate crime. Survivors and victims' families spoke about their pain, yet many chose forgiveness over hatred. One of the most memorable moments came during his bond hearing, when several family members told Roof they forgave him. Their words didn't shake him. He sat emotionless, as if their suffering meant nothing. Today, Roof sits on death row at USP Terre Haute, Indiana. Despite numerous appeals, his fate is all but sealed. The Justice Department has placed a moratorium on federal executions, meaning his sentence is currently on hold. But whenever the federal death penalty is reinstated, Roof will be first in line. His case remains one of the most chilling examples of homegrown extremism, showing how the internet can turn a nobody into a radicalized mass murderer without anyone seeing it coming. The question remains, was Roof just a lone wolf, or is he a symptom of a much larger issue in society? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this deep dive compelling, subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories.